Hello and welcome to the Storied Way Perspective. I am your guide, your host, your co traveler, your fellow storyteller, bringing you fine storytellers from the world of storytelling so that they can come and share their story with you and tell us how they are shaping the world one story at a time. On the podcast today, I have Janaki Sabesh, an actor, a storyteller, an award winning children's author, theater and voice artist, a marketer, and a facilitator. And I think she calls it the ideator. And I love that. It's amazing. It's amazing when you see one person tying the different threads of her life with uh, the firm binding of what I call storytelling. And I have known Janki for a while now, since she's been telling stories and I've been telling stories, and our paths have intersected at various festivals where we met each other. And she's all of warmth. So to the world, she is known as Gilli Amma or Ma Janki, but she's an amazing storyteller, a children's storyteller. So I'm all excited to hear her story today and share it with you. Janki, welcome to the Storyway Perspective. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Rituparna, for that warm welcome and introduction. And it's so good to be on your show. I mean, I love the storied perspective, and I am all excited to share my thoughts. And yeah, very happy to be here.
So, Janki, the reason I did this podcast is because, sometime back on my TEDx, I said that storytelling will be a currency, that we will use stories as a means to reach out to something, not always in a transactional way, but, when we share a story, we expect something back. And I know you too, have been in the world of storytelling, using this as a creative expression, using it as a tool. You now go and take classes everywhere. But I just sort of want to, understand from you, where and how did storytelling happen to you? Where and how did stories come and beckon you? I heard your TEDx where you talk about the 6-year-old Janaki Sabesh in Calcutta. So yeah, I'm very eager to know when and how did all the dots in your story connect to bring you where you are today.
So it started, I grew up in Kolkata and I have very, very fond memories of growing up there. And so I went to, I don't know whether it was called play school then. It was a Chota school. It was called Children's World, and I grew up in Purnadas Road. So my father or my mother or my nanny, her name was Manga, she used to drop me and of course maybe spend a couple of hours there. And I used to come back, but I used to come back with a lot of enthusiasm to share whatever I had learned or whatever the teacher had taught me, or rather even mimic her and to share it with an imaginary audience in the kuti chota little balcony in our house. And my parents also, I think they were very happy to just let me be. Nobody even asked me, why are you going? So I would grab whatever Amma had made and to eat, and then I would just go there. And I used to write with a chalk. There was a small window there which was opaque. So, I could write and rub. So that was one very important aspect of my, wanting to be a teacher. And for I think a long, long time, I thought for sure I will be a teacher. But then life has its own plans. And, we moved to Delhi where I did the latter part of my school, then undergrad in Lady Shri Ram, and then postgrad in Jamia Millia. And I got a very warm, what can I say, warm suggestions from my professors that, Janaki, I think you're very good with people. You must be in the communication industry. But back then, whatever you studied, you had to follow only that route. So I said, okay, so I have to be behind the camera because that is what I studied. But then I also worked with, marriage took me to Bombay, and I worked with Simi Garewal on this big documentary called India's Rajiv. And I traveled and I met the late Sri Rajiv Gandhi, and it was very, very beautiful. The entire process of, interviewing him and just shadowing Simi Garewal
Hmm.
and see what are the questions, how do you even ask such a big person the kind of questions that she would curate. And then I think 93, we moved to Chennai. And since then, I've been here. So literally all the metros done. And now you can't take me out of Chennai at all. I'm here to stay because this is home. But as I moved from city to city, one thing remained, and those were the little, tiny little memories, stories that stayed with me. Whether it was my father's exaggerated storytelling about the ambassador card that got stuck in Gorihat lanes, or his, growing up in Jamshedpur, and so many stories. And I think one that thread of wanting to be a teacher that kind of went to the background. It's somewhere, but it never died, it never went away. So I think that kept cropping up in sharing stories with children over the weekends while I was still um, a very stressful media job. I mean, you've been in the media industry, so you know. And
Hmm.
25 years I was assistant director in a company called JS Films, to Mr. Assistant to Mr. Jayendra and PC Sriram, where we did lots and lots of commercials. So my language of understanding people slowly changed from just seeing them, just sharing their stories, to how can you condense stories in 60 seconds, in 30 seconds, and then make them into 15 seconds much before social media, Instagram, and Reels happened. And I started doing a lot of voiceovers, post production, recording voices, because I was mostly in charge of post production, and I would be called to the sets wherever there was a child artist involved, because they said Janki can handle kids. So I think now that you ask me, I'm able to connect the dots again, saying, oh, it all started there, and my mom used to tell me that my grandmother, my father's mother, used to always like to be entertained. So I would entertain, and I would start, and then she would call my father and say, how do I make a stop? So I think it all started from there. So I think I would just love going about talking, and this advertisement assistant director went off to another larger role in another company called Real Image, which then went on to become Cube Cinema. I started as a customer relations manager, handling a post production audio studio. The studio was called Media Artist, and we had the late H. Sridhar, who was the right hand of A.R. Rahman, handling mix of audio of brilliant films like Lagan, Dil Chahta Hai, all of Mani Ratnam sir's films. So I started getting. I actually was a little cross with my boss for even suggesting, a jump from JS Films to customer relations manager, and said, "How can I even, do something? You're asking me to get from a very creative job to a non-creative." So he just stopped, paused, and he says, a job is as creative as you can make it out to be. And how right he was. Thank God I took that, because then I stayed on in that company for 23 years. I'm 18 years, sorry, almost close to 2 decades, and wearing multiple hats. When I left my job in 2019, I had already started doing these storytelling sessions at home. In fact, in this very room, I started with 2 children because I wanted, it was a stressful job. So I decided that I will take the Sunday, a couple of hours, just share stories, and, finish it with an activity of drawing the lion or the mouse or the house or the scenery or whatever it is. And I had started it in 2014 itself. But then I guess it all came together. And 2019, after a stint in HR also, I decided to say bye bye to my corporate career. I had no clue what I was going to do, except that I knew that I wanted to do something in storytelling. I
Hmm.
knew that this is what I wanted to do. I had already done a couple of courses. I had no clue. I had no roadmap, nothing. But the huge conviction that it's going to be storytelling for me. In what form? Who my audience is going to be? Nothing. I knew that I wanted to definitely engage with children. So that is how I left. And today, if I'm here, I think it's a lot of things that have come together, like those 100 violins and the
Hmm.
butterflies, and everything comes together to make that one meeting happen. I think that's how storytelling has happened to me. It's like constantly someone telling me, just go for it, just go for it. Don't even think ki kaisa hoga, how will it even take shape. It's all touchwood. I think it's happened.
Yeah. Did you, when you were growing up, did you have storytellers in your life, like your parents or someone else
My
who told
father,
you a lot of stories? Your father?
my father and my grandmother. My grandmother would sit down and share stories, but my father, he would just make a very small, mundane, chore of just going to the office. Forget office in Kolkata. When he used to get down the first floor, get into his ambassador car, go to, maybe for a book fair, and then come back and tell us what it was. It was never, I went, I came back. No, sit down over a cup of coffee. I sat in my ambassador car. It stopped in the red light. And we were very used to. So I can never hear if someone says, I went and came there, and I'm like, and then?
Hmm.
Because for me, it's incomplete. You have to tell me in a larger 70 format, with surround sound and with music and things like that. But my mother was an amazing listener. So that is what I picked up from her. Because as Appa was continuously sharing stories with us, my Amma would ask the right questions at the right time, and then she'll say, Apram, meaning after that, what happened? So I think I picked up that also there. And as a storyteller, Ritu, that the basis of storytelling is not telling, it's listening, because there's so much that you can actually give back to the audience if you're listening,
Yeah,
and it
absolutely.
comes straight from the heart. And I think it began there, and I'm so glad, because Appa was also a great he was very good in his humor, and his laugh is something that we all talk about till date. And whenever we get together, and they'll say, oh my god, somebody will say, you're laughing just like your dad, because we're all very loud. Where live life king size was Appa's
Hmm.
motto. And I think that uh, had a great impact on while
Yeah.
growing
The reason I ask that is because of the fact that sometimes we want to become something or we want to recreate something that we've experienced very closely, which could be, that feeling of listening to great stories or the feeling of worlds opening up in the pages of a book, or for example being the center of a room where everybody's converging around you to listen to a story, or any or the gift, like you said, your father had the gift of turning every mundane activity into a beautiful story which everybody would listen to, so the reason I asked you that is because a lot of storytellers by default have either experienced that in their life and they want to sort of recreate that at another point of their life, or the fact that they've been influenced from a very young age to follow the pursuit of a story, to be a writer, to be a thinker, to be a performer, to be a public speaker of any kind, So therefore, there is a very strong reason for somebody to go and tell stories. So that's why I asked you that question: that did you have storytellers in your life that influenced you? But this whole thing of from being behind the camera to then stepping out in front of the camera, that itself would have been a great process for you as well. Because I just the other day I was telling my husband that I spent 8 years in television behind the camera, and I felt that I was the most powerful person in the world because I could tell even my editor in chief, how to walk. But I hated being in front of the camera. But look at where life brings you at another stage, and in your life that you're speaking to hundreds of people, thousands of people, you're producing more content that you did as a television producer, and therefore this transition from behind the camera to in front of the camera also reveals a lot of hidden parts of our personality. I know what it has done to me, so I'm very curious about that, because it's not about having a great story to tell, but also being responsible as the storyteller to come out and tell it well in front of an audience. So from assisting Simi Gariwal from to, let's say, working in production houses behind the screen, to being responsible to market films, or be responsible for telling, let's say, let's say theater owners and things like that, how the world is going to move towards digital, so therefore they have to now reinvent, otherwise they get stepped. So somewhere you're also making ads, then you stepped in front of the camera too. So I'm just trying to get to the fact that from behind this, let me get things done, to saying that no, I'll take ownership of how the stories are being shaped, or I'll step out in front of the camera and then perform. So how did that shift happen to you in your head?
In Jamia Millia, when we were doing mass communication, there was also a paper on theatre. Okay,
Hmm.
so we had to perform on streets, and Mr. Faisal Alkazi was our tutor, and we used to go and perform, and we were even marked on how we could get the crowd. So we would go next to Parliament House and stand there and start calling, and it was basically shedding of all inhibitions. I was already getting very intrigued and very tickled by the fact that my voice could actually bring people closer to me. And I grew up in a colony in Delhi where we had this typical annual day. So there will be plays, and I would always be there in a Tamil play, in an English play. Then I learned music, so I would always be there in the choir, prayer song. I was singing in LSR. I mean, most of the prayer songs I would be singing. So it became like, okay, this is what, but never in my wildest imagination would have I even dreamt, because Appa wouldn't have heard of it. He wouldn't have allowed me, he wouldn't have said, no, no, that was never. But life has its own plans. So after my shadi, when I moved to Bombay, just 2 months later, my mother-in-law, my atte as I call her, she said there is a voiceover audition. I had started giving voiceover and jingles in Delhi, and she was aware of it. So I said, oh, voiceover in Bombay, it was a big thing. But she said, wear a sari. I said, why should I wear a sari? It's just a voice. She said, no, you're newly married. You have such lovely sari. So I said, okay, I decided I will oblige. And I wore this very nice, still remember the Ganga Jamuna, do side do color border wala sari. And I went, and imagined my shock. I entered to this room, and it's not a voiceover audition. It is an audition for an ad. There are cameras, there are assistant directors, there are people, there are lights, there are some people who are sitting in the side and learning their dialogues. And I'm like, Ate, what is this? She says, no, 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 this is an ad. I said, I've never done this before. She says, Arey, there's always a first time. And she just wouldn't take no for an answer. And I said, okay, I'll do this also. So I went, and, they gave me a few dialogues. I repeated, I had to deliver the dialogues in a particular way, and side profile, all this was taken. And within 1 week, they get back landline saying that you've been selected. I'm like, I've never done this before, but thankfully the shooting was very close to where we lived in Chembur. And before I knew it, I was shooting with, I think Vinod Pradhan was the cameraman. I was like, Parinda cameraman. I was like,
Mm,
what? How is this even possible? But I had to go on a bullock cart and do all kinds of things. And it was for a detergent powder. And I had signed a 1 year contract with Lintus. Of course, that was the only ad. So that is how I entered into this field. All thanks to my atte. And when I came to Chennai, I tried, working in a agency, but that lasted less than a year, because my daughter was already born then, so I couldn't handle the
mm,
pressures of how an advertising agency is. It's constantly buzzing, and just when you want to go home, the client will say, "Let's have a meeting," and things like
right.
that. So I started giving more voices. The interesting part was the voice overs that I was giving was all for Hindi, because I spoke that language in Chennai for cartoons. So it was amazing. I loved changing my voice for a dragon with a sore throat and things like that. And it was really fun. And Dhwani, my daughter, used to come with me. So I took a break. And then, of course, this JS Films happened, production house. I met him in a studio, and my director said, why don't you join me? And I said, I have a daughter. He said, bring your daughter along. I'm like, कौन बोलता है यार? Bring your daughter along to, and they were, I'm talking about 96. And I was like amazed. I mean, she used to come with me. She used to come with me. She used to sit and draw, and I used to do my work. And then I think Rajiv Menon met me again in a studio, and he said, "Why don't you model for me?" So I modeled my very big, after that initial ad, I modeled for a detergent powder. Then one day he called me and he said, "Janki, I'm doing a film, just come to the studio." I went to the studio. He said, I used to wear even a bigger bindi. He said, "Remove the bindi." I said, "Why?" He said, "Just remove." Now I removed, and he said, "Okay, it's called Kanika
Mm.
Stri in Tamil, Nan ka role de do." So I acted in my first film called Minsara Kanavu, which was Sapne, later dubbed as Sapne in Hindi. And I just went as a I took my daughter, my mother-in-law along. We went to Ooty, no makeup because none ka role. I just sang a song, of course, Besura, as the role demanded. And that was the start. Again, that was 96, 97. It was, I think now when I look back, it's like really surreal. I mean, how it just fell into place. And today I've done what? Some 32 films, of which I think I've been blessed that most of them have been blockbusters. But I think what really, I think, connected with my audience is that I've got the best of dialogues, all comedy,
Mm.
and of
Mm.
this mother who thinks her child can do no wrong. That is the whole point. And once they said, okay, this one has comedy, comedy timing is good, they started giving me more roles like that. But by this time, I had also entered into my corporate life. So I had to literally balance
Balance
my
them.
family, my daughter was growing up, my corporate life, which was also very, very demanding, and cinema. So, cinema I restricted. So, I was saying more no's than yes because I didn't want to become one of those furniture pieces in the
Yep.
film. And
Yep.
so far, I think got roles where people, my husband keeps asking, "You come for a few scenes, yeah? How do people recognize you?" That's because
Yes, I didn't
he
know.
doesn't.
Of course, I didn't know Janki was so big till I discovered that, oh my God, people know her. Even though for a brief scene and maybe a cameo role. And I remember somebody telling me that you don't watch films in the vernacular language, like in a Tamil and a Telugu or a Malayalam. And I think you've done just one Malayalam film, if I'm right.
Yes, one Malayali.
Yes. But she's big. She's big. And I said, really? And this was, of course, much before I even met you.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, great. I had, because see, storytelling as a world, at least particularly in India, was a growing one. And then I'm talking about 5 years back, 6 years back. And suddenly the world sort of erupted where we met, a lot of us met each other for the first time right before the
Yes.
pandemic or like during the pandemic for virtual sessions and things like that. And we were sort of our paths were intersecting. Of course, we were watching each other live and things like that. So I think a lot of conversations happened around storytelling and storytellers and where do we come from? What's our background? What does it take to be a storyteller? And what are the
Hmm.
skills to be a performing artist? And when this person told me about you, and I said, yeah, I mean, it makes sense because if you've ever done theater, if you've ever been a voice artist, if you've ever been an actor, these are some of the skills which will very come very naturally to you if you're a storyteller. And then of course you became a children's writer. And let's steer the conversation towards a bit of that, which is that when you're an actor, you are performing a role which is uh, written by somebody else. You mentioned that in uh, and I think I heard it in another interview where you talk about learning up a big line or things like that, which was not a very easy thing to do for any actor. But when you're a writer, you're writing and creating your own character, which you can shape and mold, and you can create other characters which are going to interact with them. But as a storyteller, it's you get that bigger freedom to sort of interpret and present that character in a certain avatar while you're telling your story to an audience. And in that performance, your story is also shaping up to be somebody else than what you had originally designed it to be, right? So I do see there is a lot of storytelling happening in all the three forms. How do you see it? What is your role with a character that you're either given, that you're creating, or the one that you're performing in front of an audience, whether young or old?
So, to start at the very beginning, the fact that I even went towards storytelling is that of instant gratification. See, you act, you finish, then
Hmm.
somebody at some point will say, "Oh, I saw you." And how? how many times in a year, in a month does it happen? Doesn't. But in storytelling, it's like immediate. They either, especially with children, they either like your story or they don't like it, or they say we loved it. Sometimes I keep telling people, their parents come for the gilliam, and then they stay back for the story, which is a huge validation of the kind of stories I share. But when, to answer your question, when I am an actor and I am, say, playing the role of this nun, again, I have very, very limited, I have my limitations in terms of dialogues. I have my limitation in where I can look, where is the camera, how much of light I take, from which light source is meant for me and for my co-artists and things like that. So there's lot of restrictions. So it's a nice mind play of, remembering your lines, remembering all the advice that has come, and remembering the instructions. But when it is in your story, oh, the world is your stage. I mean, you can do whatever. And for me, like I'm sure for many others and for you, for me, the lion and the mouse, the story is happening in front of my eyes. And as it just, becomes, it goes to the next act and the next act and the beginning, middle, and end, the children and the parents are also able to witness that magic come alive. So it doesn't matter. But if I'm the lion, I become the lion and I stay true to his character, including his voice, his gestures, his body language. And sometimes you keep shifting between the lion and the mouse and the mouse, and suddenly, even as a storyteller, we have those moments. Suddenly we don't know whether we are the lion or the mouse, and it's because we're so into it, and and the audience is laughing. So that gives you more energy, and you are saying, okay, I will do more of this because I'm now greedy. I want more of the cheer, the laughs, the claps, everything. And then I'm suddenly told that no, why don't we put all of this into a book? Now that becomes like a huge, and I'll tell you how I became a writer, because that in itself is a story. So I used to take these chota classes. It started from home, and then we shifted to a school, because my home could not take so many, because the word of mouth had said that she's doing something interesting. Why don't you send your child? So in 2 Sundays in a month, I used to go 10:30 to 11:30. 3 stories followed with some activity of, that I would take printouts of a crocodile or whatever it is. And it was basically from 3 to 4 years to maximum 7, 8. So one such session, I had completed my stories for that Sunday. And suddenly this young boy, his name was Samar, he came and he said, next Sunday, ostrich story, okay? So I'm like, ostrich story? Yeah, yeah. So I came home. I have some couple of these hand-me-down books, but nothing had a story on ostrich. I Googled, of course. And that also, nothing that suited my style of telling. And then I went back 2 Sundays later and I said, sorry, Samar, I've got some other story, but not an ostrich story. He said, you're a storyteller, no? I said, yeah. So what about it? So you're right. Huh? You're a storyteller, so you write ostrich story. And then he gave me the name Ostru. And then another child said he has a friend called Mia, Mian. Okay. Of course, Mia never made it to the book. But then I said, okay, so they've given me the big thing. I started writing. So the whole thought process, ki, acha, we are storytellers. We'll be able to write a story. What a big learning that was. I wrote and wrote, typical that cinema mein
Once
nahi
upon a
dikhate.
time.
You write, and yeah, once upon a time you write and it doesn't work. And then I attended a workshop by Shobha Vishwanath and Anushka. It was an offline thing. It was in 2017, I think, 16 or 17. And then we had that story go through lots of journeys, and finally I had some kind of a manuscript ready, and I shared it with Karadi. They said, we already have a similar story. They said, why don't you send it to Tulika? And when I sent it to Tulika, I was so thrilled that they accepted my manuscript, and they said, yes, we will publish your story. And that is the story of my first book, the Jungle Storytelling Festival. So And then, of course, I had to put in music and I had to ask my husband to compose. We had a huge launch, by which time I had started telling stories in public spaces like bookstores and things like that. Again, Shobha had told me, why don't you do my story? Na? I was doing a little something. I have never gone to a public space, never thought that I would become a storyteller and things like that. But I wanted to share stories. See, becoming a storyteller is different. Sharing stories is different. Sharing stories, you do it. We are all storytellers. Everybody.
Yeah.
My parents, my mother-in-law, everybody, my maids, they tell stories like, I just have to ask them something and such a bada story happens. So I think I felt so nice that, your story, then that became the stepping stone for people to call me to literature festivals. So this whole character of Ostro was again thanks to a little boy. And here I would like to draw attention to what my mother did was listening, right? So if I had not listened and if I had just heard Samarth, I don't think this book would have been out and I wouldn't have been an author. I listened to Samarth and I took him seriously just about 7 or 8 years of age. So we don't know in who is going to be the next change maker in your life. For me it was Samarth.
Absolutely.
So I think that is kind of made me feel. And then after that, I have my husband who says, "Acha, you're one story wonder." So I said, "No." And then, of course, it kept moving to the next and the next. So right now, 4 stories. I'm happy in a happy space.
No, it'll happen. It'll happen. I really like what you said about that instant gratification of being a storyteller working in front of children. I mean, if you're working on a set of a film, it's going to take years or quite some time for it to come out. If you're on stage, there is that fourth wall. You can't really see, look into places of people's faces, or you can't ask them a question. You can't throw something at them and hope that it's going to come back to you. So you can't do a lot of things while you're on stage as a theater artist. But when you are in front of a live audience, and particularly children, anything can happen. That instant gratification
Yes.
or that process of playing with a story as a form that, it's not working. So let me try and do something else. Or the fact that my audience has asked me something and I have not thought about it. So let me give shape to that story, uh, and tell it in a new way. And of course, you spoke about how you became a writer. Between being a writer and being a children's oral storyteller and a performer, which one is more gratifying to you? I think it's oral storytelling for sure. But what have
Absolutely.
you
Performer.
what performer? Correct, and that is
No,
Janaki
I'm
Sabesh.
performing to that audience, no, and getting that
Audience,
energy
correct.
from them. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, I agree. But the question is, what have children taught you about stories? Whether it's by writing, and of course, you've gone around and done book tours and gathered awards for your books. But at the same time, you've also told stories. So, what is it that children have taught you about stories and storytelling?
So something as recent as last month. So my second book is Parties Rasam, which I've co-authored with my daughter Janaki Sabesh, and that has a link to the trip you and I made to Kohima.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
were coming back in the rickety bus is when I got this idea, and I called my daughter and she said, "Oh, I love this. Let me write it with you and all." Parties Rasam, we wrote it during the pandemic and we struggled because it talks about the death of a loved one, the passing away, and the mourning, and how one comes to terms with, say, a lost recipe. So last month, I was invited to a school in Coimbatore, and it was just, I think, a day before the Pongal holidays. It's a big thing in the south. So about 3 4 days chutti. So I was invited to a room, and I think the children were already waiting for 10 minutes. I had a podcast recording for the school channel. I came and they were already a little, they were all in the traditional attire, and they were all from 5 to 8 years, and they were very very restless. And I started with one story. Then as I moved on to the second story, they said, "Can we have a horror story, please?" Now, seriously, I definitely didn't know any horror story. And I said, no, not really, not this time. I tried to manage, as we all do. And saying, next time I come to your school, I'll be prepared with this thing. And they said, okay, they kind of settled, but they were still restless. Then I said, listen, let me share party's rasam. And I started telling the story. And the part when the party moves on, when the grandmother passes away, I told them that bit. And there was this hushed silence. There's a room at least of 200 kids, 150, 200 kids. It was so, the pin drop silence. And then they were totally immersed in, did Malli, the protagonist, get the recipe or not, and what happened? And at the end, they came, they hugged and all that. And I said, my God, we as adults think, assume so many things that kids will not be able to relate. Kids may or may not sometimes get what you're saying. They get everything. They get every single time. It teaches me to be authentic. Be authentic, and the story goes straight to their heart, which is why I keep saying a story from the heart will always reach more hearts, because that is such a sure short, road to just reaching their heart. And that day it proven. So time and again, when you are thinking, when you're, see, when the audience is a little disruptive, and and when they are already restless, you start questioning, what else can I? So a lot of things as storyteller, things are going on in your mind. Can I do something else now? Can I put in a song now? Can I do something? Can I bring out an instrument and all? But you just have to be authentic. You just tell the story, and they said they love the story. So I think every time I have even an iota of doubt, the story kind of brings back all those, puts all those doubts to rest, and saying, just be authentic, and they will hear you out.
The Storied Way perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag podcasting network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I don't know whether you know, but I train storytellers to be
Yes, of
storytellers
course.
and new
YSB.
storytellers. Yes,
Right.
a lot of people come to me to learn storytelling, and from the fact that they've never ever told a story to a stranger, to only being telling stories to their children, or their children having grown up and now they want to again fill their life with a lot of love and affection and attention that you get by telling the story. And in my last workshop, I asked my participants that just raise your hand if you just want love. Is that why you are here? And yes, they all agreed that we want attention, we want love, we want to be hugged, we want to be told that we are giving them joy, and there is some meaning, and that's as small as being there. But the whole thing that you mentioned about being authentic in front of children, because they do see through you like a sieve. And if you are telling from the heart,
Totally.
and no matter, even if they were in their mind ready for or asking or needing or manifesting a ghost story, but then now you have another beautiful sentimental story about lost recipes and relationships, and something which is going to make them center or gather around their family for even a brief moment. And I know Parties Ratam, I've read it. I know what difference it can make, the change in the mood for the listener. And children are
Mm-hmm.
not easy to please. If they're in a mood for a ghost story, they will want a ghost story and they'll dismiss everything else that's going to come to them. And it's totally
Absolutely.
on the storyteller's craft or her authenticity with which the listener will take it. Uh, but how, from let's say the naive new greenhorn storyteller who's facing children for the first time, Could you share, or rather give an insight into what does authenticity mean? Because we are adults, we have spent years growing out of our childhood to being an adult, and you've suddenly decided that I want to now go back, I want to again go and face children. And it's easy to tell stories to children. Now you have to make voices and faces and all kinds of things. Is that what it is, or is there more?
No, it's all about, I think, first understanding the story and making sure that you understand the story to the best of your ability. Once I know that this is the story that I'm going to be sharing, I practice again. I never take my audience for granted, even if they are 3 year olds. Yes, I can change my voice, I can make funny sounds, I can bring instruments, I can bring props, but if your story does not have the conviction that it's a story that is waiting to be told, and it's a story that you believe in. So if I
Hmm.
don't believe in, and for me it's just a lion and the mouse story, anyway, So what if the monkey and the crocodile? I mean, hundreds of people could have told you the story. But why do people still come and listen to you and don't say, of course, there will be these children saying, I know the story. Yes. So you do a kind of transaction with that child and say, you know the story, but you know what? Today I want to tell the story. Can you please listen to me? And the child will actually say, okay, fine, because you've given that child importance. So you give that child eye contact, you give that child everything that the child wants, but you are a true believer in that story. For you, that story is happening in front of your eyes, and that is what I mean by authenticity. Because if you think it's happening somewhere else, then that is what the child will get. So, no matter all the gimmicks that you do, all the tricks that we have as storytellers, we do, they are not going to listen. The moment you know that I see this happening in front of me and this is how the story is panning out, the child was 100% be in that space, ready to take in whatever you give the child, whatever. If you say that there is a different ending to the lion and the mouse, the child might ask you a couple of questions, but they will believe you because you
Hmm.
believe in that story, na? So I think that
Absolutely.
is what authenticity really means. And never ever, as storytellers, we all know that we might know we are definitely older to them. We definitely have seen more of life than they have. But we cannot come from that space of I know it all. I keep telling everybody, as good as my next session. I don't know. Today was good. Thank you so much. Thank you, audience. Thank you, God. Thank you to the cells in my brain for having kept my memory intact and made me, not take away certain bits of the stories, which could happen, saying, I never shared that bit of the story. It happens. It
Hmm.
happens to the best of us. But that's okay. Only you know as a storyteller. If you tell the audience, then there is a problem. That actually, you know what, I forgot. You don't say that because they believe in you. But what happens tomorrow? Will you be able to tell the story the same way? No. It'll be a different audience. It'll be a different. The mic may not be working. There could be, you might be sweating. The AC is not working. So many things, but you don't let it show. You still come out with your authentic self because you take your work seriously. You take that 1 hour that's given to you, you take it very very, it's a performance, which is what people don't understand as
Hmm.
storytellers. I mean, you say you're a storyteller, and then what else do you do? Storytelling is an art form. When we tell stories through Bharatnatyam, we tell stories through music, but oral tradition is the oldest form. And we all know our stories not because we've read them. Yeah, most of the time we know these stories because our grandparents or our parents or our great aunts and uncles have actually shared, what has been handed over to them, what they have heard over the ages. And why do you still remember that? Only because of storytelling, authentic storytelling.
Two questions. At some point in the conversation, you said you were looking for stories or an ostrich, but you couldn't find something, not the kinds you like to tell. One, the question is, what kind of stories does Janki like to tell? That's number one. Number two is, what age group do you most enjoy working with as far as children are concerned, and why?
But the kind of stories are something that, if it's something that's happening in a very, very different continent altogether, in an environment that I am not able to relate to. If it's happening, of course, I can tell a dolphin story. I can tell a penguin story, but I will have to do a lot of research and figure out. I'll go looking for documentaries about how penguins walk. What are the different kind of things? What do they eat? And why is it that the father penguins look after? What is what? I mean, there's so much more to it than meets the eye, right? And we all do our research, and that's when, because a child can ask any question. So for me, it is something that I can relate to. If it's something happening, and if there's too much text, I'm not able to handle it. I'm a very you are aware that I tell a lot of my stories from books, and I'd like to show the book at the end, because I love that aha moment. Because the elephant in my story is very different from the elephant that the child imagined, and the elephant is very different from what the author imagined. So when I then show a little Vinayak, or even the ostrich in Jungle Swim, like, meaning their ostrich was very, very different, completely different. So I love sharing stories from books, where of course I have permissions to. That's why I collaborate with publishers. I mean, I
Yeah, I'm going to come to that question because that's a very
yeah,
big
yeah,
one that I answer it, and I want and I park that question that I want you to answer it. But let's go to that other question about age group.
yeah.
Which age group do you like working with and why?
uh Between 3 and about 10. So they all split it, no? 3 to 7 is one age group, 7 to 10 is, sometimes they combine, and I'm okay with that combination. Yes, it does get a little noisy at times, but I'm okay with that. As far as young adults, I have done very few sessions, because I'm still figuring out it's a very tricky age. And I would like to, I do have some monologues that I have written and I perform, but I'm still trying to figure out what else I can share with that age group. So
Yeah.
that I'm
And how
very happy
important
doing the
is it?
devotees.
How important is it to figure out which audience you work with the best? Because I know that's another area of question that a lot of my storytellers have, that how do I know which age group do I like working with, or which I can work with? What is, I mean, how did Janaki Sabesh figure this out
Again,
that
i
she's
think
going to tell
i
stories?
think the instant gratification, they are able to relate to you. So you know that as a storyteller, you've clicked. So
Hmm.
if they are like sitting and saying, aha, okay, then, and I said, okay, I have to up my game, I have to do something very, very different,
It
and
gets
obviously this
challenging.
is not. Yes, it gets challenging. Maybe then I read out from verse or poet books excerpts. Maybe I change the way and then ask them to just reflect upon it. Storytelling can happen in all kinds of forms. You don't always
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
jump like a monkey. I now share stories of Gajapati Kulapati even sitting down, and it's okay, because it was in my mind that I have to be jumping. I mean, as I age, I also realize that it's not always required to be jumping around. There are advantages of standing and telling and sitting and telling. But sometimes you see the audience and huh, this time I was at the World Book Fair and I sat down and I shared the stories, and they were perfectly okay with it,
yeah.
because it was all about trees. So they were very happy.
Trees don't have jump and dance, so it's okay to be anchored and rooted to tell a tree story. Yeah. So the question about telling stories from picture books. At the end of the day, every storyteller will ask, "So, which stories can I tell? Can I just open a book and read it out? Can I just open a book that Janaki Sabesh has written and read it aloud on my YouTube channel? Or I can go ahead and tell that story in a classroom, on a stage, on in a, let's say, festival, and things like that. So where and how, and I know you tell a lot of stories from children's books, particularly fiction. So how does that work? Ethics, rights?
Yeah, you have to take permission. So very recently, Ostro, the Jungle Storytelling Festival, was made into a full-fledged play. The storyteller, my friend, she approached the publisher and me. In fact, every single child bought a book. It was already a part of their reading material, and it was so beautifully done, so beautifully done. So I was feeling so happy that a school chose my book, and it has to be. I mean, they approached me, and I said we have to ask the permission of the publisher. And I was very, very happy when the publishers also said, because it works two ways. Either they approach the publisher, and then the publisher will ask the author. And when I have to perform, I always write to the publishing house saying that I would like. Very recently, I did something on saris, Paru Anand's book. I wrote to DC Books, and they gave me the permission. And I told Paru also, because I was performing at Tanera Saris. And I thought it
Mm.
was a very, very beautiful piece that I can. So I think permission is extremely important, and credit has to be given. That goes without saying. I mean, it is a given that you do give credit. There are some authors, there are some publishers who might not give you, and that's completely okay. I'm not sitting on judgment saying who is to, but the bottom line is you need to take permission. Yes, that's very, very.
Yeah, and it's my one of my first publishing experiences of working with a publisher and about permission and copyright was with Karadi. And of course, I've known Shobha for a while now, and I do explain it to a lot of my storytellers that why a publishing house will give rights to some people to tell stories to, and it's always best to not assume that it is for everyone to therefore saying that, okay, I've seen Janaki Sabesh do it, so maybe even I can go ahead and do this. So because they give rights to storytellers to do it, so that has to be taken into account. But at the same time, when if you do, if you know, if a storyteller does not get the right permission, I mean, of course, a new storyteller, not a known face, not enough clout to sort of be able to tell a school that, yeah, I mean, now please buy the book for your library for whatever reason. Where can, and of course the new storyteller does not have the ability to even sit down and write a story of her own, so where do they begin, where can they begin?
Folk tales. I think the folk tales are in abundance in India.
Mm.
You just go to any language and there will be so many folk tales. Because, see, even if a publisher retells a folk tale, it's a retelling. So that means the origin is somewhere else. So, and it could be your mother or your father who's told you the story, or a Jataka tales, no? I mean, and you know what? When we make that story our own, it actually goes through definitely tweaks and changes, because you, of course, you stay true to the story, but you will make it your own. Only then can it be your telling of that story, right? So when you do that, it becomes, I think, there are enough stories, and you can actually, sometimes I just ask my atte, and she tells me so many, the same crow story has been interpreted by her in such amazing ways that I don't see a published version of her telling of the crow who took a piece of vada that a old woman was making. It's a completely different take, because she comes from Kerala. So she has a song in Malayalam, and it's very beautiful. So I think that there's no dearth of stories, especially folk tales, and I think that is something where definitely they can begin.
Absolutely. So in my workshop, we do the Thirsty Crow, and I get everybody to write their own version of the Thirsty Crow. So I said, you have to show me a new crow who's thirsty and who has to quench his thirst. And you have to make it so compelling that I want to listen to your story till the end. So that's an exercise that all my storytellers do in my workshop. But you know, the thing with this stories is that the familiar story, making it a new one, is so challenging sometimes that picking up a fiction is so easy. I like that. I said, oh, it's a ready made story. I just need to pick it up and then go tell it.
True.
But this whole discipline of having to work on a story and reimagine it in a new context, in a new world, or with a new character type, that itself becomes a bit tough for new
So on that
storytellers.
note, Ritu, I wrote a story called Appu the Thirsty Crow. It's a multi-format book for Kriya Play. It's an app based, but they also have the book, and I've also recorded a audio, and then there's also a video, and it's all about Appu and Amo, the brother and sister, who are getting very tired of their grandfather telling the same Thirsty Crow story to them. So
Hmm.
they want a new story, and they go on an adventure. And what happens? Miku the monkey, sorry, the squirrel, and the mouse, yeah. and so many any elements that can be put. So you're right, I mean, it's not rude. Sometimes I think we shut ourselves down saying acha kuch nahi ho raha hai. If we keep thinking, no, and if we keep thinking about it day in and day night, I think the ideas will come, because I think we are filled with ideas,
Absolutely. And that's what
abundance.
children love. A new story told, I mean sorry, a familiar story told in a new way. That's like oh wow, it's a surprise. I didn't expect this.
Yeah.
Because you expect to listen to a story which you've never heard. And just, I have a couple of questions on, you describe yourself as an ideator because I know you work as a facilitator talking about storytelling in business schools, with young adults, in colleges. So tell us something about that. What form of storytelling do you take there, and what kind of lessons, lectures do you take?
It's always a course that I do called Lead Yourself Through Storytelling, where it's basically communication through stories. And when I do my sessions at Great Lakes, where I take the corporate learning and development, my so far I've done sessions for Royal Enfield, done for Kone Elevator, City Union Bank. They're all wondering 6 hours. What is she going to talk about? Storytelling. And then they realize at the end of the day that that was so much fun, just bringing out the stories that they didn't know they had in abundance. It's like you can tell stories, you are an actor, you maybe this thing.
Hmm.
Array, stories are all around us. You just have to pick up, and if you give them a little format and say, why don't you try this technique? And say you do have your beginning, middle, end, and then give them some very, very simple examples, and then from their own industry. And then they sit up and say, oh my God, and that's when my experience with the corporate world of how I kept my team together, why do I still continue to receive calls from clients whose names I have not deleted, who are still there in my contact list, and they say, Janki ma'am, can you just share the number of this? Or sometimes saying, why did you leave? Just like that, they'll call. And my all my team members, I told them, you can stop calling me ma'am. They said, no, you'll always be a ma'am. And now when I connect the dots, it's all about the stories I used to share. I used to travel like crazy and come back and share stories about the clients, and these are the little things that I bring out. I also do a lot of case studies, and of the tatas and all these marketing simple stories. As I told you, just that 15 seconds you're able to convey something so profound. And we all know 95% of the time we buy because of emotional connect. We don't buy
Hmm.
because we
Hmm.
need that product. We really, I mean,
Yep.
that left side, right side of the brain, there's always a tussle, which one. We are always going towards the emotional side. So I
Not
keep
just
telling
that,
them,
when you
and I
trust
ask,
something, you also buy it
exactly.
because you trust it. It's like, I will get a good quality, or I will get good service, and therefore I believe in the fact that I don't have to, get into a fight to get the right product. So I trust them to give me the right thing, and therefore
And
that
customer
therefore you buy
service.
into the absolutely customer service,
Yeah,
that your complaints will be heard, and that's why you sort of buy and reinvest in a certain product or a service over
correct.
and over again. Yeah. You also mentioned, and while you were talking, I was thinking that sometimes storytelling is about the other. Like, you said that you've been an actor, you are a voice artist. So telling a story, in a way that it attracts people to you is very easy for you. It's like, I have to meet a lot of people who say that, oh, because you're gifted, you are naturally, you're a reader and you're a performer. That's why it's easy for you. And it's very easy, very difficult for us, because we don't talk as much, we don't reflect as much, or rather, fact that nobody wants to listen to us. I mean, our stories are very boring. So I'm sort of digging into your bag of, let's say, techniques, or your bag of, let's say, strategies. How do you bring out the storyteller in your audience when they are so convinced that they are not the storyteller in the room?
I ask them to just share simple things like, uh, activity, like what was that one thing that connected them with, say, their child or their first teacher or their college mate. Or I talk about reunions a lot because this is a season of reunions. Golden Jubilee, Silver Jubilee, everywhere. And I talk about WhatsApp groups. Oh my God, you should see the way they come with their stories. And then it's such a beautiful effect. From a class being very quiet, one person will start. That's it. I just need that first person to start. And I will know who it is who's waiting, looking. It's one of those, like, let me see if somebody else starts, I'll wait. And then, you hit upon that. I'm sure you have a story, and then you prod them, and that's it. The rest ho jata hai, because everybody else now wants to share their story. So much so that then the class goes beyond 6 hours, and they're saying, like, somebody else has a story. So it's always that first person, and it's always the day to day. So when I teach these MBA, I shouldn't say teach, sharing my
Journey.
experiences, and telling my journey, and telling them, it's always like I'll ask them to dig in their bag and take out something and tell me the story. And it comes out so naturally. I said, that's all in storytelling. Now think
Hmm.
of it that you're in front of a corporate office or an interview, or you're asking for a loan. And now tell me, now how is it that, so, they are not, storytelling is always like connected to fiction and is
Yeah.
not a part of your corporate. So that's where I try and make them understand that it's the same. Your audience might be different, but ultimately, everybody, like I think Mr. Prakash Iyer says, parachute in. Tell me exactly what is it.
Yeah.
I used to
Yeah.
say, my CEO used to say, net, what are you trying to tell me? Because I
Yeah.
used to
Come to the
love telling
point.
stories. Come to the point. No? So it's as simple as that, and just, I think they just need that initial push, and then it's very difficult to make them stop.
Yeah. No, the two things. One is, of course, thinking that it is for the more gifted person to tell stories, somebody
Yeah,
who's more
yeah, I hear
experienced.
it all the
So
time.
somebody, yeah, somebody who's at the top will be the storyteller. The one who's at the bottom doesn't need to be a storyteller. They have to just be the listener. So that's another one of the common things that I get to sort of talk and break in terms of a myth. The other is, of course, you have to make it a performance. And when people like you and me walk into rooms, or people think that, oh my god, you have to stand like that, you have to move your hand like that, you have to make your voice like that. But it's not. We, both of us, I'm sure, we sort of play down our performance part of storytelling when we are running workshops and teaching or facilitating in groups. So that's the other thing that I get to hear a lot. And the third is, of course, the fact that I don't have any stories to tell, which is not your
Yeah, yeah.
everyday common experiences, which can be made into a good story worth telling. So I think that's the other thing that people miss out. We're seeing a lot of changes in the world today. I know you work with children a lot. And I had Shalini with me on the
Mm.
podcast a couple of episodes back. I had, of course, Richa in the first season. I had Shobha to open this season with. I had her as the first episode. And we eventually come down to somewhere parents being the gatekeepers of children when it comes to storytelling, because they have to be ferried, they have to be taken between, in times we've seen, and you said that in the beginning, that social media, of course, has taken over the world and attention spans and things like that. As a storyteller who works with children and also works interfaces with parents, where do you think we are headed as far as a community? And you're also somebody who's traveled, and travels, he continues to travel as a storyteller. What do you think, where are we headed as a community as far as children's storytelling is concerned, and the role of parents today to ensure that, uh, not ensure, I will say ensure is a very big word that we are assigning them, but their role in sort of creating a storied world for their child. So as a children's storyteller, as a writer, as a parent to a grown up daughter, and someday you will be a grandmother too, how do you see this community or people moving, and where, how relevant is storytelling in a child's world today?
It's more relevant than ever before now, especially in this uh, whole digital arena, as I call it, where we do not have the attention span at all. Time and again, storytelling has proven that it can be tackled by just being there for your child, sitting in a place with a book, without a book, sharing stories orally, and they will listen. 100% they will listen. But the point is, we give up even before, we try once and they say, Arey, ma'am, he doesn't even listen. She doesn't sit still. Okay, she won't sit still for the first time, second time, third time, fourth time, apne aap, she will come there and sit. She will sit. So I feel we don't try enough. And I think we are, if you now open LinkedIn, you know that everybody is a storyteller, right? Story coach, storyteller, story mover. Because why? Because story, which always was prominent, which is running in our DNA, has shot to prominence because now people are moving from data and all kinds of analytics and all, saying that just give me the crux in a story, give me that one line pitch, give me that one line, telling me what is it that you're trying to convey. So we are moving. You can argue with me saying that is again attention span. Maybe people don't know. It is to, why do people ask that? It is to make me understand whether you at least know why you're pitching that with them, as a corporate, because they want to know whether it is in whether you have understood the mission, vision, goal, vision board, whatever it is. But as far as storytelling is concerned, again, I think we are in a very, very good space. There is no dearth of storytellers. There is enough space for storytellers to just mushroom, but we have to be authentic. We cannot we are not one of those who can be saying that I am a storyteller. Believe that you are a storyteller, live the life of a storyteller, live it every day, and say that yes, you call yourself a story digger. So people ask, no, how do you find stories? Keep your eyes and
Mm.
ears open. There are stories
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, every time I board a flight, there is a story, there's
And
something
everything
happening.
can,
I mean,
and look at it from a child's, if you look at it from a child's
yeah.
perspective, there's a story to be discovered in every experience, and if your child is not telling a story back to you, then that's, you have to start wondering why, where are the stories going that your child is living and experiencing in his or her life. So that, I think, is a very big you know question
So
to ask
it
every
is.
parent today.
You are absolutely right, Ritu, because every day at 3:45 when Dhwani was growing up, she used to come back and call me and tell me the entire day's proceedings. Now, I don't know how many parents are able to listen. If I was working, if I was busy at that time, we would call it the pause button. We would pause and we would talk about it when I came back. Also, grandparents have a very big role. My mother, both her grandparents, they were always so keen to listen to all her chotu chotu stories about food. Today she works in the food and brand space, and she's co-authored parties does. It's because of the upbringing of, she was always given some kind of a merit in terms of the fact that she understood food. Her food was the love language. So, there has been, I can't deny the role that my parents have played and her paternal grandmother has played in shaping her interest in food. And it all comes through stories.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a privilege to have had that kind of an input from an early age, so that it shapes your thinking, your being, your articulation in the world today. And I think that's somewhere subtly changing. I have seen it in the last 10 years that I have been telling stories. It's getting tougher to bring families together to listen to stories and to value it, give it space in their life. The other thing is, of course, this whole reliance, and this is my going to be last question to you, which is that, in terms of the adult storytelling space, I do see that, okay, I don't know what my boss is asking for. I don't know what my customer will want. I don't know what my client is expecting in the pitch. And that's also because I'm not connected to them. I don't understand their needs. I don't understand their wants. So can I get storytelling, can I get AI to do the storytelling for me, to just put it into a story and go tell it? Because storytelling and AI, of course, I was asked this from a client who I was talking to, and they said, why do we need you when we can get it done by an AI model to tell us which story will work in this scenario? So I have an answer for that. But what is Janaki's answer? Because I know you teach young adults and you go into schools training people and
AI is
organizations
there.
in storytelling.
AI can be an excellent assistant for you. You need research done. Google is passé. That's what I've
Yeah.
heard from so many tech wizards now saying, are you still using Google? No, you should be using AI. I totally agree. Maybe they can use, you can give them the prompts, you can do whatever you want, but ultimately who's telling the story?
Mm.
If what the AI is giving you is what you are going to mouth, you'll be caught because you'll never be able to support it. How do you support your story? How do you make it your own? Sure, take the assistance of AI, take maybe, how do I figure this out? Can you give me some points? I mean, these are the kind of prompts that everyone uses for AI. But authentic storytelling is here to stay and it will never go out of fashion. How can it? Because we are human beings, we are hardwired for stories. And I mean, we're all, I mean, Maya Angelou said, right? People will forget what you said, people will forget the words that you use, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Now, that AI can't do. You will have to make them feel all those emotions of resilience, grit, sadness, comedy, humor, everything. Your voice, your tools that you have, your body language. Because AI is here just to help. Tomorrow, AI will be passé, something else will come. What do? You still stay, right?
I also have another point, which is that when your listener, when your boss or your client, or whoever you're telling an AI led story to, if when they ask you a counter question, you won't have time to go back to the AI tool and say, now how do I answer
Exactly.
this? Because that's where
Absolutely.
you have to predict, and you have to then get out of the script which AI has given you, and you have to use the tools that Janki and I use to work with a live audience. That could be a question about anything, and we should be prepared. If we know our audience, we know how to handle their questions. We know if we know what we want to really say and create, and what the real story is, we'll be able to do that. That's where the human ability in
Absolutely.
storytelling will never be replaced by AI, and you cannot predict it to the T and the core. Thank you, Janki. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm so glad because, like I say, we meet during festivals, we sit and chat, we are
Yeah,
each running to the next performance, and we sort of get a glimpse of how is everything going with each other's show, but we never get to sit together and have these conversations. I think the podcast is giving me a lot of this time, and I really value it. I hope you liked the conversation today.
of course, I loved it. I mean, because when I am on a podcast or I'm in a space where I need to answer questions, it also gives me time to pause and think, rewind, and figure out what is, because on a day-to-day life, when you're going about your day, you don't pause and you don't ask these questions to yourself. So thank you for asking me these questions because it's important in one's journey. I think it's always nice to pause, reflect, and say, okay, yeah, as I said, maybe this is what I meant. I think so. Thank you for asking me to be a guest, and I think it's an honor. And thank you so much. And I really value our friendship and the fact that we are fellow storytellers. You're doing so much in the field of storytelling. It's amazing, and I'm here to help people tell their stories better. Is something
Yes.
that it always puts a smile because people say, why should I tell my story? This is why you need to. Yeah.
Yes, and I want to, and after the podcast, I'm sort of going to reach out to you to learn how to, let's say, harness this energy of instant gratification. Because now I'm writing, and I'm writing to publish. So I think I have to now re-engineer my brain into, slow down and say it's okay. Work on your words. If your words are meant to create a stir in little minds and little hearts, they will,
It
and you
will
have to
happen.
wait
It
for the
will
words
happen.
to go there. Yeah, but it's re-engineering your
And
mind, because
yeah, and you will want to need it very badly, so it'll happen. See, why does
yeah,
the universe conspire? Because you need something really, really badly. Sari kainat up, it'll just come together.
that's your friend's line. You know that. All right. Okay, Janki, thank you so much for this conversation,
Thank you, Ritu.
and I look forward to seeing you next
Soon.
soon. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them what can stories do in the world today. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.